Ethan Maddox was drowning in debts he couldn't pay, but no one knew the price he was about to put on his wife's life. Lena Maddox vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of questions and a chilling secret that would expose the darkest corners of their quiet town. As Detective Taryn Steele digs deeper, she uncovers a terrifying truth. Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones willing to betray you in the most unimaginable ways. Ethan Maddox lived in a quiet town, where nothing exciting ever happened, or so it seemed. On the surface, his life looked ordinary, even admirable. He owned a small but well-kept auto repair shop on the edge of town. The locals trusted him with their cars, and he always greeted customers with a warm smile and a promise of fair prices. His wife, Lena Maddox, was equally respected. She worked part-time at the public library and volunteered at a nearby animal shelter. They lived in a modest house with a tidy yard and a white picket fence. From the outside, they were the kind of couple others admired, peaceful, friendly, grounded. But peace can be deceiving. Behind the closed door of their home, cracks had begun to form, cracks no one saw coming. Ethan was distant, distracted. He would spend long nights in the garage, even when there was no work to finish. He claimed he was working on a special project, but Lena noticed he was more irritable than usual. He jumped at phone calls, flinched at knocks on the door, and started locking drawers he'd never locked before. She asked if something was wrong, but he brushed her off with a half-smile and vague words about just stress. What Lena didn't know was that Ethan was living a double life, one tangled in debt, secrets, and growing fear. For over a year he'd been beddling, trying to make a quick fortune through online sports betting and shady poker rooms. At first it was small, manageable. He even won now and then, but like most stories that start that way, the wins faded. What remained was a growing mountain of losses and a growing desperation to cover them. That desperation led Ethan to someone dangerous, Marco Varela. Marco wasn't just any low-level dealer. He controlled a network of drug runners and debt collectors that stretched beyond the county line. To most, Marco didn't exist. No photos, no records, only rumors. But Ethan knew he was very real. He had borrowed money from Marco to stay afloat, thinking he could pay it back in a few months. But the profits never came. The shop struggled. The debts doubled, then tripled with interest. Ethan started taking cash from the shop register, then from Lena's savings account. He sold his tools, one by one, claiming he was upgrading. Lena trusted him. She had no reason not to. Still, Ethan kept slipping further into darkness. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the streetlights flickered on, Ethan sat alone in the garage. A note from Marco sat on the workbench. It wasn't handwritten. It was typed, plain, clinical. 3 lines, final notice. You owe 61. His hands trembled as he stared at it. He had nothing left to sell, no one left to ask for help. His lies had reached the edge of collapse, and the truth was waiting to drag him under. But even then, even in the cold grip of fear, Ethan wasn't thinking about coming clean. He was thinking about how to survive. That night, Lena made dinner as usual, chicken and rice, his favorite, but Ethan barely touched it. He just nodded absently, his mind racing. To her he looked tired. To him she looked like a solution. The next morning, Lena left for the library with a kiss on his cheek, humming as she went. She believed everything was fine. She didn't notice the way he watched her walk to the car, too long, too quiet. If she had, maybe she would have asked more questions. Maybe she would have packed a bag. Maybe she would have run. But she didn't. And that was the moment everything began to change. The day after receiving Marco's final warning, Ethan Maddox could no longer pretend he had options. The walls were closing in. He woke up before sunrise, drenched in sweat, heart pounding like a war drum. He couldn't eat. He couldn't think straight. Every sound felt louder. Every minute felt shorter. It was as if time itself was squeezing him, forcing him toward a choice he didn't want to make but couldn't escape. He went to the shop and opened late. His hands shook as he fumbled with the keys, and he knocked over a can of oil without noticing. The garage felt colder than usual. The silence in the shop was unbearable, like it knew something terrible was about to happen. He kept checking his phone, dreading the moment it would ring. By noon, it did. No words, just breathing. Then the voice, smooth, low, unhurried. "You've got until tomorrow night. You know what happens if you fail." The call ended before Ethan could respond. His throat went dry. He stumbled backward and sat down hard on the floor, staring blankly at the garage door. He had less than 36 hours now, no money, no miracle, only fear. By that evening, Ethan drove around town like a ghost. He wasn't running errands, he wasn't visiting friends, he was searching for something, an idea, a loophole, anything that could delay what was coming. But everywhere he looked, the answer was the same: there was no way out. At one red light, something flickered in his mind, a memory from 2 weeks earlier. Lena laughing at a customer's toddler at the library. She was always kind to people, she never asked for anything, she trusted him blindly. It wasn't a new thought, but now, in the pit of his despair, it grew louder. She was valuable, not in a monetary way but in a different. She was smart, quiet, obedient. She looked younger than she was, she didn't ask questions, and in Ethan's fractured thinking, she became a kind of currency. It was a thought so monstrous that he recoiled from it immediately, but it didn't leave. By the time he pulled into the driveway, the thought had turned into a plan, not a solid one, not even a detailed one, but a possibility, one that might just stop Marco from killing him. The plan didn't need to be perfect, it just had to be enough. That night he barely spoke. Lena noticed. She asked if everything was okay, and he nodded quickly, forcing a smile. Then he kissed her forehead and told her he loved her. He hadn't done that in weeks. She smiled and said she loved him too. Then she returned to her book, unaware she had just become part of a trade. Ethan couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed for hours, listening to her soft breathing beside him, wondering how far he was willing to go. Would Marco even agree to such a deal? What if he didn't? What if he laughed and killed them both? Or worse? But the next morning, when Ethan met Marco's enforcer behind the abandoned warehouse, an agreed-upon spot for desperate meetings, he made the offer. His voice cracked as he explained. Not once did he say her name. He called her a resource, a favor, a trade to settle the debt. It was cold, calculated, shameful. But Ethan had already stopped seeing her as his wife. In his mind she had become a way out. The enforcer didn't say much. He didn't nod, didn't scowl. He just pulled out a phone, typed a message, and waited. Then it buzzed. He looked at Ethan and said, "Tomorrow, midnight. You know what to do." Ethan stood there alone as the man walked away. The deal had been made. There was no turning back. And Lena had no idea she was living her last normal. The day moved slowly, like time itself sensed what was about to happen. Ethan walked through it like a man on autopilot. At the shop he didn't work on a single car. He kept glancing at the clock, each passing hour pushing him closer to midnight. His stomach churned, and a dull ache had settled behind his eyes, as if his mind was screaming at him to stop, but he didn't listen. Lena called him during her lunch break, just like she always did. She told him about a new book that had come into the library, and how the shelter was planning an adoption event over the weekend. Her voice was full of life. Ethan listened, said he was tired, and hung up quickly. Her laughter lingered in his ears. It wasn't guilt he felt, it was terror. Terror of what he was about to do, and terror of what would happen if he didn't. By early evening he was home. Lena had just returned from work, smiling like nothing in the world was wrong. She asked if he wanted to watch a movie. He said maybe later. She cooked dinner spaghetti with garlic bread. She talked. He stayed mostly silent. He couldn't look at her for too long without his hands shaking. His mind kept flashing to the instructions he'd been given. Midnight. She must be unconscious. Back gate. No noise. No mistake. That was all the message had said. It had been delivered to him in person. No names. No signatures. Just a folded piece of paper, handed over by a man with dead eyes and no emotion. After dinner Lena poured 2 glasses of wine. Ethan added something to hers when she stepped away. He bought the sedative that morning from someone he barely knew. He wasn't even sure how much was too much, but he couldn't ask. No one could know. When she returned to the living room, he handed her the glass. She thanked him, smiled again, and curled up on the couch beside him, sipping slowly. Ethan watched every drop she drank. 30 minutes later, she began to blink slower. Her words slurred slightly, and she giggled as if tipsy, but confused. She said she felt strange, lightheaded. She tried to stand up but her legs gave out beneath her. Panic flickered in her eyes for a second. She looked at Ethan, clearly trying to understand what was happening, but her voice never came out. She collapsed on the couch, barely conscious. He moved quickly, just like he'd been told. No hesitations. He carried her out the back door, through the gate, where a black SUV waited with its lights off. The door opened without a sound. Two men stepped out. One grabbed Lena without a word, the other watched Ethan closely. The transaction was silent. In seconds, she was gone, loaded into the vehicle like luggage. No struggle, no questions, just darkness. The SUV drove away, its tires silent on the wet pavement. Ethan stood there long after the taillights vanished. The night was quiet, unnaturally. He half expected the world to react, sirens, screams, something, but there was nothing. Just the hum of a distant highway and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. When he finally went back inside, the house felt hollow. The couch still held the imprint of her body. Her glass sat on the table, half full. Her phone buzzed once, someone from the shelter checking in. Ethan stared at it, frozen. This was the moment where the weight of what he had done should have hit him, but instead there was only silence inside him, a numbness. He walked to the bedroom, shut the door and sat in the dark. He didn't sleep, he just waited, and outside, the world turned, unaware that Lena Maddox had vanished, erased in a single night, handed over by the man who promised to protect her. In the days following Lena's disappearance, the town barely noticed. The story Ethan told was simple. She left. He claimed she'd been acting distant for weeks, had grown unhappy in their marriage, and must have decided to walk away. It was heartbreaking, he said, but not surprising. People believed him, they always had. He was the kind of man others trusted, the kind who fixed your brakes and didn't overcharge. Why would he lie? He even filed a missing persons report the next morning, his voice shaky, his eyes. The officer on duty took the statement, entered it into the system, and told him to wait. Cases like this didn't get urgent attention unless there were signs of violence or foul play, and according to Ethan, there were none. Just a woman who packed nothing, and vanished. Lena's co-workers were concerned, but not alarmed. Some whispered that maybe she'd been having a breakdown. Others said she might return soon. The community didn't know what to think, and most of them didn't dig very deep. In small towns, people have short memories and long silence, but one person wasn't convinced. Taryn Steele was new in town, transferred from a larger city, where she'd worked homicides, missing persons, and drug trafficking cases. She had come to this quiet county looking for a slower pace, but her instincts hadn't dulled. When Lena's file crossed her desk, just another low-priority case, it bothered her more than it should have. There was something about the file that didn't sit right. Lena hadn't taken her wallet. She hadn't used her phone or cards since the night she vanished. No witnesses saw her leave the house. No buses, no cabs, no social media activity, nothing, just silence. Taryn read Ethan's statement 3 times. His wording felt rehearsed, too controlled. Not a single detail was out of place, and that was exactly the problem. Real grief is messy. Panic leaves holes. Ethan's version of events read like a script, polished and cold. She paid a visit to the Maddox home under the pretense of following up. Ethan greeted her with tired eyes and forced politeness. The house was clean, too clean. Lena's things were still there. Clothes in the closet, makeup on the dresser, a half-finished book on the nightstand. If she had planned to leave, she had taken nothing with her, not even her toothbrush. Taryn asked Ethan about the last night he saw her. He stuck to the same story. They had dinner, she went to bed early. In the morning she was gone. No note, no message. He said she'd done it before, disappeared for a day or two during arguments, but never this long. Taryn nodded politely but didn't believe a word of it. Before she left, she noticed a photo of the couple on a shelf. Lena smiling, arms around Ethan. Taryn studied the picture. Something in Lena's eyes struck her. Happiness, yes, but also something quieter, harder to define. She snapped a quick photo of it on her phone, then walked back to her cruiser with the weight of questions building. She began retracing Lena's last steps, starting with the library. Her co-workers described Lena as sweet, kind and stable, not someone who would run off without a word, not someone unhappy in her marriage, not someone who would just vanish. Then came the first crack in Ethan's timeline. Security footage from a gas station near his shop showed Ethan driving late the night Lena went missing, far later than he'd claimed to be home. He wasn't getting gas, he wasn't buying anything, he simply pulled in, sat parked for 5 minutes, and then drove off. Odd behavior, no obvious reason for it. He hadn't mentioned this in his statement. Taryn noted it. A quiet alarm rang in the back of her mind. She didn't have proof of anything yet, but her instincts were clear. Something was very wrong. And the more she looked, the more certain she became. Lena hadn't left on her own. Someone had made her disappear. Taryn Steele knew she needed more than just suspicious footage and a gut feeling to crack the case open. Ethan Maddox was careful, too careful. Every word he'd spoken was measured, every alibi rehearsed. The man seemed to glide effortlessly between truth and lies, leaving little trace for an investigator to follow. But Taryn was patient. She believed in the power of small details, and sometimes, people's past spoke louder than their present. She reached out to someone who might hold a piece of the puzzle, Jamie Knox. Jamie wasn't just any local, he had a complicated history. Once a trusted friend of Ethan Maddox, he had fallen into the wrong crowd years ago, ending up in and out of jail for minor drug offense. But Jamie had turned his life around recently. After a stint in rehab and some time behind bars, he was clean, working at a community center and trying to build a new path. Taryn tracked Jamie down at a late-night support meet. When she mentioned Ethan Maddox and Lena's disappearance, Jamie's eyes flickered with something, maybe fear, maybe guilt. He agreed to talk, but only if it stayed between them. Jamie told her that Ethan hadn't always been the man the town believed him to be. Underneath the calm exterior was a man driven by desperation and secrets. Ethan's no saint, Jamie said quietly. He's been borrowing money from people he shouldn't, gambling way more than anyone knows, and that guy Marco, Ethan's afraid of him. Jamie explained that Marco Varela was more than a dealer, he was a shadow that haunted the edges of their town, dangerous, ruthless, and feared by most. Ethan had owed Marco a lot of money and the pressure was crushing. Jamie confessed that Ethan had once asked him a question that didn't sit right. How much do you think a person is worth on the streets? Ethan had asked, as if bargaining someone's life was a simple business transaction. At the time, Jamie laughed it off, thinking Ethan was joking or venting. But now, thinking back, it sounded darker, like Ethan was planning something terrible. The more Jamie spoke, the more Taryn felt the weight of the truth pushing through the surface of Ethan's calm lies. She asked if he'd seen or heard anything else, anything about Marco's operations, or if Ethan had mentioned Lena. Jamie hesitated, then nodded. There's talk, rumors. Marco doesn't just deal drugs, he deals people too, says they're his property. I heard he's got women and men working for him, but no one talks about how they get there. He glanced over his shoulder, as if the walls themselves might have ears. Ethan's scared, but he's trapped, and if Marco finds out someone's talking, that person disappears. Taryn realized how dangerous the path was getting, but she knew she had to keep going. She started digging deeper into Marco Varela's world. No official records, no arrests, just whispered warnings and fear. It was as if he existed in the shadows deliberately, making sure no one could touch him. Taryn shared her findings with Jamie, who agreed to help her navigate the darker corners of the town's underworld. Together they pieced together small clues, a coded message on a burner phone, an address scribbled on a torn receipt, the location of an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. Lena wasn't missing by choice. She had been held somewhere cold and hidden, used as currency in a game that Ethan couldn't escape. Taryn's resolve hardened. She had to find Lena before it was too late, and to do that, she would have to outsmart Marco Varela, a man who seemed untouchable. But the question that haunted her most was this: how far would Ethan Maddox go to save himself, and what price had Lena already paid? Night draped the town like a thick velvet curtain, as Taryn Steele and Jamie Knox crept toward the abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The place was a forgotten relic, its rusted metal siding swallowed by overgrown weeds and graffiti-streaked walls. No one wanted to go near it, and for good reason. It was the kind of place where secrets whispered in the shadows and danger waited silently behind every broken window. Taryn's heart hammered in her chest, every sense stretched taut. This wasn't a routine investigation anymore. This was a rescue mission, one that could either save Lena Maddox, or seal her fate forever. She adjusted the flashlight in her hand, the beam cutting through the night but barely illuminating the decaying floorboards beneath their feet. Jamie led the way, eyes sharp despite the years that had worn away some of his streetwise edge. He knew the rumors, the stories, and some of the paths Marco's men used to move in and out unseen. The deeper they went, the more Taryn realized how close she was to the truth, too close. At the edge of the warehouse, they spotted the telltale signs, fresh tire tracks in the dirt, a locked side door with scratch marks around the handle. Someone had been here recently. This wasn't some forgotten relic. It was active, dangerous. They moved carefully, pressing their backs against the cold metal walls, listening for anything, voices, footsteps, the faintest breath of movement. Hours passed like minutes. Taryn's breath formed small clouds in the chilly air. She wanted to call for backup but knew any noise could put Lena's life in immediate peril. Then they heard it, a muffled cry, barely more than a whisper coming from the far end of the building. Taryn's blood froze. The sound was fragile, desperate, like a threadbare lifeline tossed across the void. She motioned for Jamie to follow as quietly as possible toward the noise. The air grew thicker, heavier, filled with the scent of damp concrete and something else. The cry came again, more urgent this time. Around a corner they found a locked metal cage, barely large enough to hold a person. Inside a figure was slumped, her hair tangled and dirty, her eyes wide with shock and exhaustion. It was Lena. Relief crashed over Taryn like a wave, but it was quickly tempered by the stark reality of Lena's condition. She was weak, barely able to move, her clothes torn and stained. The sedative had worn off, but the terror remained etched deep in her eye. Taryn pulled out a small lock-picking set from her bag, hands steady despite the adrenaline pounding through her veins. Jamie kept watch, glancing nervously toward the entrance. Every second felt like an eternity. The lock clicked open, Lena's head lifted slightly. She whispered a single word, "Help." Taryn reached inside, gently helping her out of the cage. Lena collapsed into her arms trembling. She didn't speak, only stared with wide eyes, the silence louder than any scream. Jamie checked the perimeter, his unease growing. "We need to move, now." They moved quickly but carefully, carrying Lena between them. Every step was haunted by the fear that someone Marco's men might return at any moment. The night seemed to stretch endlessly. As they made their escape through a back alley, the distant sound of sirens growing close. Once safe in the cruiser, Taryn called for an ambulance. Lena was alive, but barely. The horrors she'd endured were visible in every bruised inch of her body and the haunted look in her eyes. As the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Taryn's mind raced. They had found Lena, but the nightmare was far from over. Who else was trapped in the shadows? How many more were caught in Marco's grip? And what would happen to Ethan Maddox now that the truth was unraveling? One thing was clear, the quiet town would never be the same again. The sterile brightness of the hospital room felt almost surreal after the suffocating darkness of the warehouse. Lena lay motionless on the bed, her breathing shallow but steady. Tubes snaked from her arms, and the faint beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the otherwise silent room. Taryn Steele stood by the window, watching the rain drizzle down the glass, her mind racing with questions and doubts. Lena's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing the deep shadows etched beneath them. They were eyes that had seen things no one should ever have to witness. Yet even in that fragile moment, there was a flicker of recognition when she saw Taryn. No words came, but the look said everything, a silent plea for safety, for answers, for justice. Taryn knew the road ahead would be long and brutal. Lena's body bore the marks of physical torment, but it was the scars beneath the surface, the ones etched into her spirit, that terrified her most. Rebuilding trust wouldn't be easy, not after what had been done. Outside the hospital, the storm grew fiercer, matching the turmoil brewing beneath the surface of the town. News of Lena's rescue had leaked, despite Taryn's efforts to keep things quiet, and whispers spread like wildfire. The fragile facade of calm that Ethan Maddox had maintained shattered into 1,000 pieces overnight. The police were relentless. They interrogated Ethan again and again, but this time the questions cut deeper. Taryn watched from the sidelines as his carefully constructed story began to unravel. The man who once seemed so composed, now looked smaller, as if the weight of his choices was crushing him. The community was divided. Some mourned Lena's suffering and demanded justice. Others whispered darker suspicions about Ethan, about Marco, about what lengths people might go to when trapped in desperation. The truth was a jagged thing, impossible to hold without bleeding. One night, as Taryn sifted through files and photographs late at the precinct, her phone buzzed with an anonymous message. "You're closer than you think. Watch your back." It was a warning, sharp and chilling. Marco's reach was long, and he was watching. That same night, Ethan disappeared. No note, no call, just gone. His home was empty the next morning. The only sign he'd been there was a single photograph left on the kitchen table. Lena's smiling face, folded carefully beneath a set of cold, hard keys. Taryn picked it up slowly, her fingers trembling. It was as if Ethan had left a message, one that spoke of regret and cowardice all at once. With Ethan vanished, Marco's shadow grew darker. The town held its breath, waiting for the next move. Rumors circulated that Marco was cleaning house, silencing anyone who might expose him. Taryn's investigation hit roadblocks at every turn. Witnesses clammed up, and crucial evidence disappeared. It was clear Marco wasn't just a dealer, he was a force of control, fear and ruthless power. But Lena slowly, painfully began to talk. Pieces of the nightmare slipped free, fragile and fragmented. Names, places, the cold eyes of the men who had held her captive. Every word she spoke was a step toward breaking the silence that had allowed the darkness to thrive. Taryn realized the battle was just beginning. Saving Lena was only the first victory. Bringing down Marco, unraveling the web of lies and exposing the truth buried beneath years of fear. This was the true fight. And in the shadows the question remained, was Ethan a victim, a villain, or both? The answer would come, but only after the storm passed and the dust settled. Until then the town waited, restless and uncertain, caught in the uneasy calm before the next wave of chaos. Months slipped by like a shadow creeping over the town, slow and inevitable. The early shock of Lena's rescue faded into a tense, uneasy silence. The public had moved on, satisfied that justice was underway. But Taryn Steele knew better. The real battle was just beginning, and the deeper she dug, the more tangled the web became. Marco Varela remained elusive, a ghost whose footprints vanished as soon as they appeared. Every lead Taryn pursued ended in dead ends or frightened witnesses who refused to talk. It was as if the entire town was under his spell, a silent pact of fear binding their lips and darkening their eyes. Lena was improving, though bit by bit, the walls she'd built around herself started to crack. Her memories returned in fragments, faces, places, whispered threats. She spoke slowly, carefully, as if the past were a fragile thread she dared not pull too hard. But what she revealed was enough to send shockwaves through the investigation. There were names no one had expected. People in the town's highest circles, people who had been above suspicion, people who had looked the other way while Marco's empire grew like a cancer beneath the surface. Lena's story painted a picture not just of brutality but of betrayal. Meanwhile, Ethan Maddox's disappearance grew darker by the day. Taryn found signs he had fled the state, credit card usage in cities hundreds of miles away, but after that nothing. No phone calls, no messages, no sightings. It was as if he had vanished completely. Some said he'd gone into hiding, others whispered he had been silenced. Taryn refused to believe the case was closed. There was a storm coming, one that would shake the town to its core. Then the message came. An unmarked envelope slipped through the door of the precinct. Inside was a single grainy photograph. Ethan Maddox, alive but bruised and beaten, standing in a dimly lit room surrounded by faces. Taryn recognized from her investigation Marco's. On the back, written in shaky handwriting, a single word, help. The discovery reignited everything. Ethan wasn't just a suspect or a coward, he was trapped in a nightmare far worse than anyone had imagined. Taryn assembled a team, determined to find Ethan before it was too late. They followed the trail through the dark underbelly of the drug trade, piecing together clues that led them to a hidden compound deep in the woods. It was guarded, fortified, a fortress designed to keep people in and keep the law out. As they prepared for a raid, Taryn's mind raced. The stakes had never been higher. Rescue Lena, find Ethan, dismantle Marco's network before more lives were destroyed. But just as the operation was set to move, Taryn received one last chilling message, a voicemail, distorted and cold. You think you can stop that? You have no idea what's coming. Walk away or you'll be next. Her hands shook as she listened. Fear wasn't new to her, it was the price of her job. But this was different. This was a warning straight from the mouth of the darkness she was fighting. Still, she couldn't back down. The night of the raid was tense and silent, broken only by the crackle of radios and the distant howl of wolves. They moved through the shadows, hearts pounding, every second heavy with the weight of what might come next. Inside the compound, Ethan was waiting, not as a victim but as a man changed by fear and regret. His eyes met Taryn's, filled with something she couldn't quite place: relief, desperation, the promise of reckoning. The rescue was just the beginning. As dawn broke over the town, Taryn knew this was more than a case. It was a reckoning, a test of courage, loyalty, and the lengths people would go to protect those they love. The darkness was far from over. But for the first time there was a glimmer of light.